Thank you very much. There are three issues challenging to the South Korea and the U.S. alliance existed. First one is China issues, and the second one is North Korea issues. Third one is already we discussed the rules-based international order. We established a kind of new order. I'd like to ask the speakers about this kind of issues and what kind of difference between the South Korea and the United States has, and then also I really hope that we can have more discussions on North Korea issues. Mark here, and then also the Joseph Titrani, the ambassador, is here, and Joseph Nguyen here. We are very distinguished and excellent people here. So first, Gina Kim will be a Korean presenter. Then second presenter, it must be the Joseph Titrani ambassador, right? Okay, thank you. Then please, Gina, you go first.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this roundtable discussion. I'm really, really glad to be part of today's event. Well, I think it's not just me, but I believe that many were so relieved in the expectation that the U.S. foreign policy will be back to normal when they watched President-elect Joe Biden's speech on November 7th, stressing the restoration of U.S. leadership. The launch of a new administration means that the predictability of U.S. foreign policy increases, which is very good for South Korea. Seoul will be able to reduce policy uncertainty in dealing with pending alliance issues and North Korea's nuclear concerns. In my opinion, the change of leadership in the U.S. poses both challenges and opportunities for us. First, multilateralism is back. Given that President-elect Joe Biden has emphasized U.S. leadership in the international regime, which certainly includes the NPT, non-proliferation regime, the U.S. interest will be not recognizing North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapon state in that regard. It is expected that the U.S. will try to reach an agreement with North Korea through multilateral consultations with its allies on the issue of denuclearization, along with, hopefully, peace regime on the Korean Peninsula at the same time. Good thing is that we can coordinate the discussions on these two closely related issues. Also, this creates more room for South Korea to play a bigger role than before. But there are also concerns. The Democratic Party platform says it will revitalize alliance system and strengthen cooperation among the US, South Korea, and Japan. This also means that the expectations for strategic cooperation between South Korea and Japan will be very much high. Can we convince the South Koreans that it's better to put aside historical issues and trade disputes with Japan for a greater goal? That's not going to be very easy. Many in Washington may want to discuss more about the ways to develop future-oriented alliance system and strengthen the strategic partnership. Then people will soon find out that their priorities are slightly different. Like we saw before, many in Seoul will continue to emphasize Cold War legacy on the Korean Peninsula and the role of alliance focused on North Korean threats. Whereas many in Washington will want to emphasize the value of the alliance to the Indo-Pacific partnership, more support to defending the maritime rule-based order, and more participation to multilateral military exercise to push back a little bit against China, like we discussed in the first round of this talk. As discussions continue, South Koreans will soon realize that, well, keeping strategic ambiguity in order not to escalate tension with China is no longer a viable option. Then we are going to have lots of debates about it. And President-elect Joe Biden has pledged to reverse several of President Trump's policies that had overturned important decisions made by the Obama administration. I guess Iran JCPOA would be on the top of the list. one may wonder whether the negotiations with Iran will come first before negotiations with North Korea. President-elect Joe Biden made it clear that the U.S. should return to the JCPOA. And given the political schedule, especially the presidential election in Iran, which means President Rouhani will be replaced by someone else with more hardline conservative views, then Iran can be an urgent matter for the U.S. If the U.S., because of this reason, takes a wait and see strategy for the time being by asking North Korea to make a unilateral decision to come back to the negotiation table, then the burden of preventing escalation of tension on the Korean Peninsula eventually falls on the South Koreans. I'm not sure how this will be conceived by the South Korean public. The current South Korean government wished to revive the momentum for dialogue within the term. And people in Seoul will feel the urgency and have some anxiety more than others about the deadlocked situation. Second, principled diplomacy based on deterrence and sanctions. That's quite emphasized by the people from the Democratic Party. And the Obama administration often emphasized that the nuclear negotiations with Iran was possible because of multi-layered pressure. And that has laid out a sustainable implementation framework based on a strong verification mechanism backed by all parties concerned. If the U.S. seeks more pragmatic or practical negotiations with the North Koreans, then South Koreans will welcome it. However, before and during talks with North Korea, deterrence and sanction will be the tools in the toolbox. Then the U.S. may want to have close consultations with South Korea to strengthen combined defense capabilities, ranging from detecting, disrupting, and destroying new tactical weapons developed by the North Koreans. In addition to that, it may seek to build missile defense system to enhance interoperability with its allies for early detection and response to any threats in this region. Of course, there can be some areas of shared interest. South Korea wants to strengthen extended deterrence consultation mechanism and seeks more opportunities to integrate U.S. nuclear capabilities and South Korea's conventional capabilities in response to threats from the North. While the U.S. wants to enhance some deterrence, strong deterrence posture in this region. And there will be also a shared understanding about concluding cost-sharing negotiation by arriving at an increase at a regional level, very regional level. But still there remains the issue of burden sharing, which includes not only cost sharing, but also contribution to multinational military operation, foreign assistance, and other tasks of cooperative security. A lot has to be discussed between the two allies. And about sanctions, the budget of the South Korean Ministry of National Unification for inter-Korean cooperation, including health and medical aid, will increase by 13.7% for next year. That means that the South Korean government will continue to pursue expanding areas of cooperation, which includes providing food, fertilizer, and building infrastructure such as railways and roads, etc. However, the U.S. strategy to make full use of China's leverage over North Korea requires first and foremost to combine the pressure against Beijing not to take side with Pyongyang. And we will continue to see sanctions because of cyber threats, human rights abuse, and non-compliance to the UN Security Council resolutions and others. These are going to continue for the time being. In this kind of context, the idea of expanding inter-Korean cooperation can generate some debates, I think, between the two allies. Well, these are a few thoughts that we can discuss for the second round of talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gina. And then please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Thank you, George Washington University, for this important conference. Let me just a few comments on the U.S. ROK relationship. This is a special relationship, as we know so well. It's forged in the crucible of the Korean War. Over 40,000 Americans were killed and 100,000 wounded. We had over 800,000 South Korean soldiers, casualties in the war. Over 1 million civilians lost their lives. This is a special relationship, and it goes back to, well, certainly we're in 2020. We're going through if you will, the 70th anniversary of the Korean War and the 67th anniversary of the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1953 between the United States and the Republic of Korea. And the issue here was North Korea with its invasion of South Korea. And that speaks to the combined command we have. And it touches issues that are so important to U.S. ROK relations, because this is a special alliance. And I would think the first priority has to be resolving issues that affect this special alliance. I mean, indeed, our trade, South Korea is the 6th largest trading partner with the United States. We're basically coupled in a significant way, technologically, scientifically. We're talking about pandemics, what we just saw with COVID-19. So there's so much there. So we need to resolve issues like the combined forces here. When we talk about OPCON, so there's some clarity on the combined command, the US command, the ROK command, and coming together on SMA, on cost sharing. There shouldn't be issues here with whether it's 900 million or 4 billion and finding resolution. We shouldn't be discussing whether we keep 28,500 troops in South Korea. This is something that needs to be resolved between our leaders. And I think the Biden administration will quickly resolve these issues, these bilateral issues, with a close and important ally. I can't think of a more trusted ally. We talk about we share common values, whether it's human rights, the rule of law, democracy. This is who we are. So I would think the first issue is resolving issues with the ROK, U.S. ROK issues, whether it's, again, the host state, indeed, talking about, the cost issues of SMA and the responsibilities from both sides. But indeed, the issue of North Korea looms large, because as we go back to, again, the 67th anniversary of our Mutual Defense Treaty, and also the armistice, because we're still in a state of war with North Korea. I mean, we don't have a peace treaty with North Korea. So that has to be one of the major issues that we, with the ROK, have to come together to say, how do we resolve this issue? We've been doing it for 26 years of negotiations. We've had some minor progress, but 2 steps forward and 3 steps back is not sufficient. North Korea now, we're talking about up to 60 nuclear weapons and ICBM capabilities, and they can MIRV those ICBMs and other, talking about cyber, we're talking about chemical, we're talking about, there's a myriad of issues that need to be resolved, and we need to come together on that. So that has to be priority 1. But let me just say also, I think with the Biden administration, we're going to see an approach which is not necessarily top down. It's going to be, and I think the 6-party talks were meaningful, because it brought 5 countries together, certainly the US and the ROK, but also Japan and China and Russia, to work with the DPRK, to let the North Koreans, let Pyongyang know that there's a consensus on complete verifiable denuclearization. And you notice I don't use irreversible. Nothing is irreversible. It's complete verifiable, with safeguards and hopefully additional protocols, very similar to the JCPOA when we were talking about working with Iran and the agreement we got in 2015. So we have to be open on that. And we have to look at North Korea is not going to do a Libya. We know North Korea is not just going to give everything up, because security is the core issue for the Kim Jong-un and his predecessors, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung. This is the core issue, survivability. And their one concern and their major concern with certainly the US is what? Regime change. So we have to give the security assurances. They're hurting economically. Sanctions indeed are biting, and I agree, sanctions are important. And deterrence has to be important. That has to be on the table. But there needs to be a process whereby, like we did in the six-party talks, we did actions for actions, commitments for commitments. There needs to be some incentive. But also, I might add something else. Intra-Korean dialogue. The visits, the separated families, visits to Mount Kumgang. We're talking about Kaesong. It's the North Koreans who took down the liaison office in Kaesong. Well, Pyongyang, rebuild it. Get a dialogue with the ROK, and the US certainly, and hopefully China would be supportive of that, encouraging that dialogue between the two, building the trust because we don't have the trust. So resolving the issues between the US and the ROK, our key ally, because there's so much in common. It's not only economic commonality and scientific commonality, it's our values, and that's tantamount. So when we talk about the free and open Indo-Pacific region, we're talking about whether it's the South China Sea and some other issues. We're telling China very, very clearly, look, the US is still a player. The US is still, and I think Frank Januzzi said it well, the US, whether we use the term superpower or not, the US is a committed nation that is committed to our allies and our partners. And we will seek a process that leads to greater human rights for all people, whether it's in the Xinjiang, or whether we're talking about in Tibet, whether we're talking about what's happening in Hong Kong. So there will be a lot of pushback to China, but with China, we're talking about strategic competition, and there's nothing wrong with competition. And we're there, but we will always be there. We will be pushing back. And I think this is what we're going to see with the Biden administration. And China is going to have to deal with that. Because as we saw, and it was just mentioned before, and I think Dr. Kim, you mentioned it very well. If North Korea retains nuclear weapons and builds more nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems, what option do we have but more sanctions? What option do we have that we need to better enhance our deterrence capabilities? This should be very obvious to Pyongyang and Kim Jong-un. He's a smart man. He understands this. Is this where they want us to go? And the ROK, no, it should be the other way. And I personally feel Kim Jong-un, and we saw it with the two summits, but also with the Panmunjom Declaration with President Moon Jae-in. I think Kim Jong-un is prepared to move in that direction, but not in a Libyan model. They're not just going to give it all up. It's going to be long. It's going to be tedious. It's going to be hard work. It took us over 2 years for the joint statement of September 2005 with the six-party talks. And China, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I think China has to be very much part of this. North Korea is tethered to China economically. If China stops providing them with crude oil and petroleum products, how does that economy exist? So I think China has to be part of it, and China has made it very clear they want also denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. They don't want to see a nuclear arms race in the region. They don't want to see the possibility of fissile material nuclear weapons being proliferated to rogue states or terrorist organizations. So there's a commonality of interest here with China. So making that part, whether the Biden administration reconstitutes the six-party process, or working more closely in a meaningful strategic way to resolve the North Korean issues with the ROK, but with also Japan and China and Russia. I think this has got to be the approach. So let me just end on that point. I think on the whole question of China, and I really, I've spent a number of years living there. Look, we see with President Xi Jinping a lot of with the Belt and Road Initiative, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, China 2025, now China 2035. They're looking at 2049 on the sentinel of the establishment of the People's Republic of China. China is moving in that direction. That doesn't mean we're not there. The US is going to be there, and there's nothing wrong with strategic competition. but we will always push back, and we're seeing this with our, if you will, our free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think that complements, and I think what the ROK is doing with their new Southern policy, we come together, we bring all our efforts together, but we all share a common value. And we all speak the same, and we all have again, that crucible of the Korean War that keeps us together on this in such a powerful way. I think this is a positive message to China and other countries that the US is still an active player. We are a leader. We're committed to our allies and our partners, and we'll never walk away from them. And the first thing to do, and I think the Biden administration will do it, is resolve these bilateral issues between the ROK, whether it's cost sharing and whether it's the number of troops, and resolve, and also encourage, not discourage, encourage South Korea to do more to work on intra-Korean issues, again, like separated families, Mount Kumgang, okay, so tying the rail together and so forth. And then we move forward. So on that, I'll end on that note, but I'm very positive. I think with the Biden administration, I think we're going to see a lot of momentum, a lot of dynamic momentum in the region that certainly affects U.S. ROK relations.
Okay, thank you for your enthusiastic, presentation, Ambassador Detrani. Thank you very much. Very encouraging remarks. And then before we go back to the discussant, and then I'm gonna ask the discussant to answer the question, what is the estimate of Kim Jong-un's view and potential actions toward the Biden administration? Will we return to a cycle of provocation? And also, I would like to ask one more question for my own. I wonder whether Biden pays attention to Singapore agreements with North Korea. This is my question. And then different views seems to exist among area specialists and functionalists and generalists in the Biden administration on the North Korean issues. So I'd like to listen to your response from Ambassador Yoon, and then Sharon, and then Sheena, and there are all and Pomchul Shin, and then Korean experts. Please.
Great. Well, thank you so much to George Washington University's Institute for Korean Studies. It's really good to see a lot of old friends. It's been far too long since I've been able to be in Korea, and I look forward to being able to have these conversations in person in the near future. When I was listening to the discussion in the first hour of the program, I actually wanted to raise a couple of issues, and I guess I'll put this as sort of, thinking about this in terms of two challenges for the alliance and one potential real area of opportunity. And I think that this moves forward or addresses some of the comments about shared values and some of the very concrete ideas for how to broaden and elevate the role of the U.S.-Korea alliance, both regionally and globally. But I admit I see a couple of challenges in doing so, and I wanted to just lay those out as a topic for discussion to see whether we could, figure out how to address them in the months and the years ahead. The first is that the first panel talked a lot about the turn to multilateral engagement that we expect to see under the Biden administration. And in particular, a more multilateral approach to the Indo-Pacific. But the US and the ROK have both been somewhat outside some of the key efforts at multilateral or regional integration that have been proceeding in the last couple of years, in particular on the economic front. And so if you think about RCEP and CPTPP, if I can get the acronym correct. Right. And so the question is, how is the alliance going to approach multilateralism in a region where a lot of the multilateralism that is occurring and the integration that's occurring right now excludes both Washington and Seoul? or where Washington and Seoul have chosen not to take on a leadership role. Do we expect that to change? And if so, what is the appetite in both capitals for not only engaging in multilateral integration projects, but actually stepping forward and becoming a leader? Leadership sometimes requires being, potentially a little bit further or acting alone or first rather than waiting for others to go, or waiting for consensus. And so I wonder about the leadership role of the alliance, if we really are going to see, is that intention with this turn toward multilateral engagement? Second area that I wanted to ask about is the one that Ambassador Jatrani's comments highlighted so well, which is this idea of a partnership that is founded on shared values, respect for democracy, freedom, human rights, etc. And here again, I wanted to note just and Frank Januzzi knows this, really, really well, right? Senator Biden, when he was in the Senate, played a key role in the passage of the North Korean Human Rights Act. He pays a lot of attention to these sort of classic human rights issues. And yet sort of simmering below the surface in the U.S. ROK relationship has been, quite frankly, a real concern, at least that I hear among human rights circles, about the Moon administration's approach toward the human rights of North Korean defectors and resettlers in South Korea. And that's true at both the sort of bilateral alliance level, but it has the potential to be a global and a multilateral issue as well. So there's concern in the United States, and I would say on a bipartisan basis, about the crackdown and restrictions that have been placed on activism by North Korean defector groups. And then at a global level, right, there was, I think, dismay, again, somewhat overshadowed by the timing of the election, but I think, again, this will come to the fore in a Biden administration about South Korea's decision for the second time to decline to join a UN resolution on North Korean human rights. And so if the alliance really is to play a global leadership role that is values-based, I think both of these issues pose a problem for that goal and that objective. And I think we need to be very honest about that if we are to truly have an alliance that is a leadership, plays that leadership role on democracy and human rights. And so I'd like to have a candid discussion of that, about where that puts the alliance, and whether or not that's going to limit its ability to act as a regional and global values-based leader. And then I think the last point I wanted to make is a bit more optimistic, which has to do with a real, what I see as a real opportunity, which is that the Biden administration has indicated a lot of interest in a different approach to global public health. And South Korea, I think, has been, really a success story in terms of its management of COVID-19, but not just on a public health front, because it has managed to deal successfully with the challenges of COVID-19 in a way that still protects and upholds the values of South Korean democracy. And so this is an area, to Ambassador Jatrani's point, where I think there's a lot of potential, again, leadership that the alliance could provide, especially in the Indo-Pacific, where there are some unconsolidated democracies. There are countries that are in transition throughout the region and the broader region. And there's a lot that South Korea potentially could teach, and where South Korea could be a model, and the alliance could play a key role in spreading and disseminating a democracy-compatible model of public health response. And so I'm really excited about that as a potential area of collaboration. And I wanted to ask whether, our speakers see some room for growth or a new model of partnership in that dimension of regional and global affairs. It seems to me that that's entirely compatible with the new Southern policy and the geographic emphasis of the Moon administration. And so I see a lot more area of sort of compatibility here, again, as long as both countries really retain and do emphasize those core democratic values that are at the heart of the alliance. I have a couple other thoughts, but I've talked for long enough that I'll stop there, and maybe we can pick others up in the discussion. So thank you, and I very much look forward to our speakers' thoughts on those questions.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. Maybe to this question, and then from Korean side, Sang-Hyun Lee may answer to the question, and then but maybe first other, yeah, okay, go ahead then.
Actually, I don't have an answer. I have a question. It seems to me two pillars of Biden administration foreign policy is what is the multilateral engagement, and the other one is the value-based diplomacy. So if that's the case, I would say it may be the time to redefine what the Korea-US alliance all about. Meaning that what this alliance should work together in the future. Some people say that this may be an alliance vision, future vision, something like that. So think about how Korea and United States approach the important issues. For Moon Jae-in government, probably #1 priority may be inter-Korean relations. For Washington, maybe China policy takes the top priority. So we have a different priorities, and perhaps a different approach and threat perception toward North Korea and China. So how can we coordinate, and how can we say that this alliance is working smoothly on those complicated issues? So perhaps in U.S.-Korea alliance, Joe literally said that perhaps we have to solve the cost sharing issue, something like that. But if cost sharing is all about diplomacy, I think that's a quite easy part. More difficult part maybe how can we share values? How can we share responsibility? So is it time to think about Korea-US alliance to evolve from cost sharing alliance to value sharing and responsibility sharing alliance? So is Seoul and Washington ready to discuss that evolution? I think that's the question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Wang Yi.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. Let me add one more question. Actually, the South Korea and the United States have two things in common. The first one is carbon neutrality. Actually, President-elect Joe Biden declared the United States achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Last October, President Moon Jae-in also declared Korea will accomplish carbon neutrality by 2050. And the other thing is that the Green New Deal. Actually, Korean government kicked off Green New Deal last July. Probably Biden administration will launch New Deal, Green New Deal project, big scale. And then we can think about a coalition of Green New Deal between the United States and Korea. I think that, yes, we really obsessed with the confrontation, gap, differences. But I think, yeah, we have a lot of room for cooperation between two allies.
Okay.
I raise a question about the prospect of cooperation between two countries in terms of economies and yes, environment and energy.
Yeah, that's the big thing, the energy cooperation and also the green growth, strategies that we shared. And so there is quite, large room for cooperation. That's what is thinking. And then, okay, any other Ambassador Yoon or Sharon? Okay, please. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to say we have so many experts and so many topics here. We could go on for a week. But I'm very pleased to be here. I wanted to come back to something that Gina Kim mentioned and also address one of the questions in the panel. And that is, you know, Gina, you said, obviously, any new president's going to have many different foreign policy priorities to balance, right? And so I do think that Iran, I also think that the New START treaty, those are going to be really high on the list. But I think that, you know, time has changed. Things have moved on since the Obama administration. And clearly there will, first of all, be a focus on China, which elevates North Korea, I think, in terms of the position that it takes. We no longer have the luxury of avoiding North Korea. And I would say that the Obama administration did put that on a lower priority. So I don't want to embarrass you, Frank, but you know, if the Biden administration would appoint someone like Frank to lead the North Korea negotiations, you know, appoint somebody high level to follow through, that would send the right signal. I also think that North Korea is not going to give the Biden administration the luxury of ignoring it, right? And that was another question in the comments, you know, what will North Korea do? I'm not sure, but it will come up with some provocation. But the question in one of the comments was, you know, when we get past this euphoria over return to normalcy and multilateralism, what can we really accomplish? It's tough, you know, multilateralism is a lot tougher to implement. And that was also in your comment, Gina, I think, about, you know, all right, do we want Japan and North Korea to collaborate more? That is really tough. I liked some of the ideas that I heard here about involving other middle powers. I don't know whether that, you know, do you keep that just in the military sphere or move beyond? But just one plug for Biden, you know, this is the most experienced foreign policy president we've had in a long time. And so even though I completely agree with Frank that he will, I mean, we have the COVID pandemic, first of all, and the US has not done a good job. But, you know, there are a lot of domestic priorities, but foreign policy, I have every confidence that he will put a team in that, you know, has a plan. One last point, and we've danced around the question of, is this strategic competition? Is this great power competition? Mm-hmm. I wanted to just pose one question, if we have time, back to Frank. You said, you know, of the three long-standing positions that Biden has on security, that there would be zero tolerance for threats from China to US security. I wonder if that will, I think that has to change, actually. You know, if we don't view all of this as zero sum, but, you know, coexistence or some kind of strategic competition rather than great power competition. Sorry for going on, but it's been fascinating for me. Thanks.
Yeah, it's quite a tough question, but anyway, Frank, are you gonna respond to it?
Well, just briefly, you know, I think what I was trying to get at with the zero tolerance was things like the affirmation by Biden, even shortly after the election, that the U.S. would consider any Chinese encroachment on the Senkakus as a violation of the Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Mutual Defense Treaty, and that there wasn't going to be any ambiguity about that. So I think the same would apply to Chinese arms sales to Iran. This is something that Biden raised in 2001 when he met with Jiang Zemin and pushed the Chinese very hard at that time, 20 years ago, to cease their military support for Iran. So I think that's what I was trying to get at. But I don't disagree with you, Sharon, that avoiding zero-sum thinking with China is going to be very important. And I think I think in that sense, the subtle shift in the language of the United States on the free and open Indo-Pacific concept may signal a kind of a willingness to acknowledge that not all of China's activities through Belt Road Initiative are pernicious, and that maybe the U.S. and China can, compete, but not view each other's efforts always as contrary to each other's interests in Southeast Asia and elsewhere.
Okay, yeah. I still wonder how to execute that kind of zero, zero tolerance of policies actually over, Chinese violation. And then, okay, please, Ambassador Yoon, please.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I think when we look at managing U.S.-South Korean relationship, there is essentially, in my view, two baskets. One is what many of you have concentrated on, so-called cooperation agenda, what to do about values, what to do about global pandemics, trade, and human rights, and so on. That's what I call cooperation agenda. And I think you are right, to concentrate on that. And then the second basket is what I call core agenda. And I think Joe DiTrani talked about it. Core agenda is one, North Korea. What to do about North Korea. Second issue is how do we make progress? Do we see eye to eye on alliance management issues? That's a core agenda. Third one is, as you rightly mentioned, regional agenda. Specifically, do we see eye to eye on China? Do we see eye to eye on Japan? These are what I call core agenda. Now, the difference I see between Biden and Trump is, of course, we are moving from someone, let's be generous to Trump, pragmatist, to someone who is more traditional, okay? Traditional, and what I'm sure Frank would say, based on principled diplomacy, So we're moving away quite a bit. But I also think we're moving away quite a bit from Obama as well in terms of foreign policy. I do think Biden has so much more experience than Obama had when Obama came in 2009. Biden has very strong ideas on engagement, how to deal with Northeast Asia, that I don't think Obama ever really had in the beginning. Certainly, it's not going to be strategic patience with North Korea. I don't think he's going to wait. And so, that's an issue. But the issue, that's from the Washington perspective. From the South Korean perspective, I do understand frustrations of Kim Hong-gyu and former Minister Yoon Young-kwan. But the problem with South Korean frustration is these are all, the core issues are all political issues in South Korea. More than political, they are election issues. And you don't understand that Washington understands that. We know there is a strong opposing voice to what the government is trying to do on North Korea, what the government is trying to do on alliance, what the government is trying to do with vis-a-vis China. So if you feel frustrated that government-to-government discussion is stuck, that's because in Washington, people do understand there is a very strong opposing voice to what the government is also trying to do in South Korea. Thank you.
Okay, may I have one more question about what about the Singapore, agreements? And would you, answer to that question to the Ambassador Yoon, please?
My view is Biden administration will seriously consider acknowledging Singapore agreement. What's there not to acknowledge? It has complete denuclearization. It has improvement in relationship. It has building peace. So if I was, I would strongly recommend as the beginning step, acknowledge Singapore agreement, and then North Korea can acknowledge other agreements, including inter-Korean agreement. That would be my recommendation. you know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, yes, Mr. Yun, please.
I think Professor Shina Grittens, raised an important question of human rights of North Korea and South Korean government's approach on this issue. I have no, I'm not in the position to represent South Korean government's approach on the North Korean human rights issue. So I just would express my view on this important subject. I personally hope and I personally believe that we should try hard to improve the human rights situation in North Korea. But I think we should do it wisely in the sense that our efforts should produce some positive results in terms of improving human rights in North Korea. What I mean is the traditional American approach on North Korea's human rights issue, I would say, has been kind of the Jacksonite approach, very confrontational and pressure-only approach. And I wonder how much results, positive results there was. Of course, we continue to raise our voice, but I'm asking whether that kind of pressure-only tactic, confrontational approach on the human rights issue only can produce some kind of positive results in terms of our desire to improve real human rights condition of each North Korean people. What I'm saying is, human rights condition would be improved only when it some kind of pressure goes with engagement. Engagement, what I mean is engagement can establish some kind of linkages or channels toward inside North Korea, through which we can influence North Korean government's policy so that it reconsider their policy of human rights issues. For example, the reason why I believe human rights condition in China could be improved was mainly because American engagement policy since the Nixon doctrine. Nixon's engagement policy toward China. In case of North Korea, we don't have that kind of engagement at all, and the U.S. government does not like to engage North Korea. That much, and only pressure. Trying to apply pressure. It couldn't produce any, not much, real improvement of human rights condition in North Korea. So I think the new Biden administration, I hope, can think on that issue, carefully, and probably upgrade American human rights policy toward North Korea in coming years. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, okay, Shina, please. Yeah, okay, 2 fingers.
Just a brief comment to Minister Yun
Oh,
and Shina on human rights. North Korea wants a normal relationship with the United States. They want normal diplomatic relations. And we've told North Korea, and I think the Biden administration will emphasize this, to get normal relations, they have to work on their human rights record, whether it's 100 to 200,000 political prisoners. They need to close some of those camps. They need to show some progress. Otherwise, I don't see how they could ever get to their goal of having a normal diplomatic relationship with the United States.
okay, thank you. Shina, please.
Yeah, let me just maybe I think respond to a couple of these comments, because I think this is, like I said, I see this as an issue that it would be best to do some thinking about now and proactive problem solving, so that we're not in a position where it suddenly becomes an issue that neither side anticipates. And so as somebody who cares deeply about the alliance and the values dimension of it, I want to put this on the table so that we can work on cooperating on it. I guess, so one thing I will say is that dismissing or seeing this sort of pressure-based approach as purely an artifact of the Trump administration would, I think, be a misunderstanding of domestic politics on the American side. The reality is that the North Korean Sanctions Policy Enhancement Act was passed into law at the very, very end of the Obama administration. And so it's easy to confuse the shifting the congressional aspect of the US position with the incoming Trump administration, because those two time-wise happened so quickly. But one of those has changed and the other has not. And the reality is that the United States now has laws that tie progress on sanctions relief not only to denuclearization, but to human rights. And that is going to make that does produce a complicating factor to Dr. Gina Kim's point a moment ago, or a few minutes ago, does mean that human rights are now an issue that has to be dealt with on the way to denuclearization under US law, right? And that's not a Trump administration point. That's a structural feature now of US domestic politics and law. And I guess the other issue is to see this, I think, purely as a US issue. I think there is some misalignment, and I think again we will be well served by simply articulating what the difference is. As I see it, the Moon administration has tended to see progress on the Korean Peninsula, including for the people of North Korea, as best achieved by dealing with the North Korean government, and therefore defectors are a potential problem to be resolved if they disrupt progress in the inter-Korean government-to-government relationship. And that is, I think, quite different from the typical view, not only in the United States, but at least in some corners in Europe and globally, which is that engagement with the Korean government, or the Korean government itself is a major obstacle to the improvement of human rights, because they are the principal violator of human rights on the Korean Peninsula, and that defectors are actually a tool for potentially solving that problem, or a partner and an assistance. And so there's actually a very, very different framing of what the problem is and the role that defector groups play.
30 seconds.
Yeah,
Please.
sorry. But let me just say, this is not just an issue of instrumentally what works best to produce progress with North Korea. It's actually become, in the United States and globally, a defining issue for Korean democracy. And Korean democracy is Korea's biggest global asset. So compromising that for an uncertain gain on inter-Korean relations would, for me, raise grave concerns. I say that more as an analyst than as a normative prescriptive direction, but I think that trade-off needs to be clearly articulated. Thanks. I'm sorry for taking.
Okay, thank you. We have only 3 minutes left to the end. So, Shin or Mark, do you have something to say? I'll give you. It's okay. Okay, Pyongyang, please.
Okay, as regards the question about the Kim Jong-un's view and actions toward the Biden administration, I think Kim Jong-un's options are very limited. Its aggressive reaction may cause more sanctions, tough sanctions, or at least sanctions can be extended. The economy is already hit very hard by the sanctions and the COVID-19. Therefore, these tough sanctions can cause great pain to Kim Jong-un. By contrast, taking modest option, emphasizing, say, modeling through or self-reliance, well, Kim Jong-un may worried about the effect of this kind of modest approach toward the Biden administration, because Biden administration may put the priority attached to North Korea lower by looking at, okay, he is very calm. That is what he is worried about. So I would like to highlight, as Ambassador Yoon's point, why not, I think, at early stage of the administration, saying that we sincerely recognize Singapore summit, and we want to basically negotiate sincerely with North Korea. That gives a signal to Kim Jong-un about what kind of options he will take. So that, I think, may be very helpful to stability in the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you. I'm going to give the Gina and then Joseph Titrani 1 minute to wrapping up. And also, please, sorry, giving you such a short time. And Gina, please.
1 minute. Okay. Following up on Professor Pyongyang Kim's comments on possible reaction from the North, I think expected utility really matters. Any nation seeks provocation when there is an opportunity to have a political gain at a low cost to be paid. And like other normal states, North Korea should go through a foreign policy decision-making process, considering domestic priorities, available resource, and strategic calculation, and so forth. I think even though North Korea wants to make a provocation, it will certainly understand that high-profile provocation like ICBM and nuclear weapons test will certainly blow any chance of the new U.S. government considering practical negotiations with the North. If North Korea believes that it should show some kind of assertiveness, then it will subdivide its actions, starting from rhetorical threat, in turn intentionally demonstrating some movement of military forces on the ground, revealing preparations of testing. So we're going to see a gradual increase of tension on the Korean Peninsula. How to react to this kind of things really matters. So that's the things that we have to prepare.
Thank you. Ambassador Titrani, please.
Just very briefly, great discussion. We share common values with the Republic of Korea. I think making that very clear to the world and certainly to North Korea, they can never put a wedge between the United States and the ROK is so critical. And as we move to resolve the North Korean issue, because that has to be peacefully resolved, because there will not be stability in the region. We could talk about free and open Indo-Pacific. We could talk about new Southern policy. But if we have a North Korea that retains nuclear weapons and continues to be provocative, we will not have stability. So that has to be one of the key, if not the priority. And it should be value-based also, because human rights has to be part of that resolution.
Thank you for all the guests and then audience, and I sincerely appreciate for your contribution. And then I will turn to the Yeon-ho Kim to, wrap up.
Thank you, Hung-gyu. I'd like to thank all the distinguished roundtable participants, especially our Korean friends, for staying up late at night for this discussion. It's already past 1 a.m. in Korea, believe it or not. So I really appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank our technical team for putting this together. And of course, thank you all for joining us. And with that, let me conclude today's webinar. Stay safe and healthy, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.